First of all, there's the issue of how do we live in a world that we cannot fully understand? And the answer for Pascal is that we have to make the best choices we can under conditions of uncertainty. And this is the foundation of his religious thinking, which leads to the wager. The second thing that he wants to think about is how can we make sense of a life where we are such inadequate, defective creatures, and where we know that our lives are going to end without us achieving anything worth achieving. He compares human existence to being chained in a dungeon and having the guards come in every now and again and strangle someone. Right? It's just awful, just terrible. And this is what we're stuck with. How can we make that seem worthwhile? And Pascal's answer to that, of course, is only religion can make that worthwhile. The problem about religion is that he has no proof of God's existence. Philosophers before had always claimed they could prove that God existed. Pascal says we can't prove God exists.
So, Michael Moriarty, what do you think is coming out of the process? Do you agree? I mean, obviously, I would guess you go along with David. Would you like to develop that in any way?
Yes, you can't prove the existence of God because the proofs aren't convincing. They're not going to convince atheists, even if they happen to be valid. So, what you have to do is to think about the human condition, and the world, David has described very correctly how Pascal sees the human condition as one of wretchedness, and an inability to obtain happiness, knowledge, wisdom, health, whatever. Pascal makes a move at this point that goes somewhat in the opposite direction, where he says our consciousness of these things means we kind of transcend them. In many ways, our lives are like those of animals. But we're unhappy animals because we can imagine something better. How did we ever come to imagine something better? So that's an element of the greatness of the human condition.
Imagination is very important for him.
It is, yes, and it kind of is partly delusive, but it's also partly a sign that we're maladjusted to reality. We're not just part of the world, although we seem to be. So how do we solve this idea that we're at one level totally part of the natural world, and another level we seem to transcend it? And at that point he suggests, well, Christianity explains this. There's the doctrine of the fall. We once did know happiness, truth, justice, virtue. We've still got memories of that, and that's why we can never be happy.
Sorry to interrupt you, Michael.
Yeah.
Did he believe this literally or as a metaphor?
No, he believed it literally.
Right.
Yeah,
okay.
that we actually do inherit guilt from Adam and Eve. And so at that point, the person who's not interested in Christianity starts thinking maybe there is something in this after all. And Pascal analyses the quest for happiness mostly as kind of escapism from the pain of the present. But here's a religion that promises you true happiness. So his argument then is, on the simple calculation of probability, you've got to investigate it. You've got to see whether it may be true.
So this is Pascal's wager.
Yes, yes, that's right. And what that means is investigating the history. If you look at the facts of history, you'll see there's something special about Christianity, and that's sort of the kind of way it goes.
Michaela, would you like to tell us about Pascal's wager?
Sure. Pascal's wager marks the beginning of modern decision theory. So it's a very simple argument that says, imagine there are two possible states of affairs. Either there is God or there isn't God, and there are two possible courses of action, wager for God or wager against God. The argument is designed to persuade the libertines and the skeptics, not the atheists, because we need to assume that the two states of affairs, there is God or there isn't God, have a non-zero probability. So if we are atheist, we would assign zero probability to the hypothesis that there is God. So we are trying to persuade the undecided, the skeptic. And the argument goes that, well, if there is no God, and in that case we're not going to lose anything if we wager for or against God. But if there is God and we wager against God, then we risk eternal damnation. So we should wager for God because the expected utility is higher in that case. There are a series of problems with the argument, which obviously depends on whether you accept the premises. So some may dispute that there are only two possible states of affair, there is God or there isn't God. One may say, well, there could be a third state. You can claim that there is God, but we will never come to know God via a life of religious devotion, as Pascal claimed. So in that case, the argument wouldn't go through. Others have claimed that Pascal's wager doesn't really establish the Christianity is the only real possibility, because you can apply Pascal wager to gods of other religion. This is what the French philosopher Diderot said. He says an imam could reason just as well. There is no way to establish the validity of Christianity using the Pascal's wager. There's a third kind of problem. One may say that the libertine is actually giving up something when she decides to go for a life of religious devotion, because if there is no God, the libertine has given up a life of worldly pleasure, so is missing out something. So whether or not the argument goes through depends on whether the agent may count future event as more valuable than present events. So if the rational agent discounts the future, then obviously the argument wouldn't apply.
David Wootton, how did the Pascal's wager feed into the argument of the time? Was it, as it were, the last gasp of a Christian philosophy, or one of the last gasps, to be more accurate, or was it the breathing a bit of life into Christian philosophy?
Well, in many ways it seems to me it's the founding of modern Christianity. Modern Christianity takes its start, one might think, that from the notion that religious faith is an act of decision-making where you commit yourself to something that goes beyond reason. And in emphasizing that you're going beyond reason in this commitment, Pascal is changing the nature of Christianity. Traditional medieval Christianity insisted that fundamentally all the basic principles of difficulties about explaining the Trinity and miracles and so on, but fundamentally Christianity was a rational religion. Pascal wants to say it's not a rational religion, it's a decision you make under conditions of uncertainty where you don't know what the truth is, but you commit yourself to it.
Existential decision.
It's an existential decision, and it leads to a whole, Kierkegaard and the whole of modern existential Christianity comes straight out of this.